Welcome to Caribbean Business Review, where insight meets impact. We bring you economic and financial updates, sharp statistical breakdowns, and data-driven insights on the forces shaping the region. Smart analysis, bold ideas, real Caribbean intelligence. This is CBR. Welcome to episode 10 of season 2 of the Caribbean Business Review. I'm Joseph Cox. Now, first of all, thank you so much for your continued support across all our social media channels, including MKR Radio. Our special guest this week is Latoya Halstead, Director of Communications at the Consumer Affairs Commission, as we discuss price gouging in Jamaica, remedy or fallacy. In the CBR briefing, we explore the Caribbean's breaking point, a blueprint to finally fix disaster response. A region-wide blueprint calling for a 12-month overhaul of Caribbean disaster governance. But before we get there, an important issue deserves attention. Across Jamaica and across the Caribbean, misinformation is now moving faster than government, faster than institutions, and certainly faster than the law. A single voice note, a fabricated screenshot, a deepfake. That's all it takes to trigger panic, derail relief efforts, or destroy someone's reputation overnight. And here's the truth. Our laws are stuck in the typewriter era when the chaos is being driven by algorithms. Jamaica's public mischief law only applies if someone knowingly makes a false report to the police. But nobody is going to the station to lie anymore. They're going to WhatsApp, they're going to TikTok, they're going to Instagram Live, reaching 50,000 people in 5 minutes. After Hurricane Melissa, a viral message told Jamaicans they needed a TRN, a digital ID, and banking details to get relief. None of it was true, but it caused confusion, fear, and delayed help when people needed it most. Then an entertainer claimed that items were stolen from a relief shipment. Items were named, the story went viral, but the manifest confirmed those items weren't even on the shipment. The narrative was false, but the reputational damage was real. And yet, no charges, no accountability, no consequence. Because the law wasn't built for this world. Digital misinformation today can spark panic buying, trigger bank runs, undermine donor confidence, and destabilize recovery efforts. This is no longer a social media problem. This is a national security threat. Jamaica needs a Digital Public Mischief Act, one that criminalizes malicious digital deception, covers every platform, addresses deepfakes, enables rapid takedown, and strengthens digital evidence rules, while still protecting free speech, journalism, and political debate. Because right now, panic is moving faster than policy. And Jamaica cannot defend itself in 2025 with legislation written before television existed. With that reality in mind, now let's turn to the stories we are tracking this hour in Market Watch and Global Pulse. Coming up in the Market Watch, Hurricane Melissa inflicts $30 billion blow on Jamaica's agriculture. Guyana upgrades 2025 growth to 15.2% and multi-guarantor debt for resilience initiative launched. Then in Global Pulse, Mexico imposes a 156% sugar import tariff, U.S. trade deficit widens, and U.S. hemp industry faces collapse. All that and more this hour on Market Watch and Global Pulse. Coming up next, it's a CBR briefing. This is a CBR briefing. I'm Joseph Cox. Now, across the Caribbean, extreme floods, landslides, and storm surge are hitting harder, and earthquakes remain a very live risk. Yet our response still largely depends on heroics and luck. Today, we need to stop pretending. This is a region-wide 12-month fix to make our disaster systems work when the power is out, networks are down, and people need help fast. We see the same failures, island after island. Outdated disaster laws, procurement paralysis, cashless fragility when ATMs die, price gouging without teeth, shelters that open without power, single point of failure of telecoms, and port green lanes that turn red. Even our paper trail fails. Thermal receipts fade in days of heat and humidity, erasing accountability. Disaster management can't remain ceremonial. It must be systemic. Within 90 days, every Caribbean government can land 12 fixes. 1. Pre-vetted emergency orders for evacuation and price control. 2. Incident command training across all emergency operations centers. 3. Three-path communication, sat phones, VHF, and roaming telcos. 4. A live camera operating picture, mapping hazards, roads, shelters, and outages. 5. Fully stocked shelters with power and protection protocols. 6. Fuel priority lanes for responders. 7. Banking continuity, mobile branches, check exceptions, and offline e-money. 8. Barcoded relief distribution with durable paper plus SMS receipts. 9. 24/7 customs green lanes. 10. Rumor control cells to kill misinformation. 11. Privacy audit beneficiary lists. And 12. Mutual aid compacts across utilities and NGOs. Then we modernize the laws, once properly, across the region. A Disaster Governance Act, refreshed with clear activation triggers and transparent emergency procurement. Hazard-based planning that ties land use to flood and seismic maps. Lifeline standards for power, water, and telecom resilience. Emergency finance rails with automatic drawdowns and public dashboards. Market integrity laws to end gouging and fuel resales. Data sharing with privacy guardrails and shelter standards in law. Backup power, sanitation, and accessibility. Early warning only matters if people can hear it. Every island needs a triple path system, alarms, radio, and cell broadcast, firing within 15 minutes of a trigger. A protected FM disaster channel, solar sirens, and cap-based cell alerts must be mandatory. When the grid fails, those are the voices that saves lives. Preparedness begins where the hazard hits. Community emergency response teams in every high-risk district, schools that teach disaster literacy, alerts in plain language and sign language, relief lines safe for women, the elderly, and the disabled, and yes, the widest networks we already have belong to political parties. Train their workers as community information liaisons, cross-party, GPS-verified, reporting into the EOCs and relaying verified alerts back out. Politics stops at the storm's edge. Preparedness isn't charity, it's continuity. Governments and business chambers must sign business continuity compacts so supermarkets, fuel suppliers, and banks reopen within 24 hours. Central banks should activate offline payment rails to keep wages and trade flowing. Microinsurance for farmers and MSMEs must become routine, not relief. So therefore, here's a scoreboard that matters. Alert speed, less than 15 minutes. Shelters powered within 6 hours. Cash to households less than 72 hours. 3 independent comms parts up 99% of the time. Preliminary damage report within 72 hours. 80% of the after-action fixes closed in 90 days. Now, if your island can't hit these numbers, you're still betting on luck. And luck is not a strategy. I'm Joseph Cox, and this has been your CBR Briefing. This is Market Brief. I'm Joseph Cox. We begin in Jamaica, where Moody's RMS now estimates Hurricane Melissa losses at over $20 billion, triple the government's early figures and equal to the country's full-year GDP. The storm also inflicted $29.5 billion Jamaican dollars in agricultural damage, affecting 70,000 farmers and wiping out key crops and livestock. Still in Jamaica, the net international reserves fell $67.6 million to $6.13 billion. Over in Cayman, government posted a $137 million surplus despite major overspends. The Bahamas economy expanded 4.7% in the first half of 2025, driven by construction, utilities, trade, and tourism. In Barbados, S&P upgraded the sovereign rating to B+, citing fiscal gains, debt reduction, and reform momentum. The Turks and Caicos Islands also reported a strong outturn with 6.5% growth in 2024, buoyed by tourism revenues and rising reserves. Guyana has revised its 2025 outlook upward, now expecting 15.2% GDP growth, supported by both oil and non-oil expansion. The CDB has backed a new digital ecosystem for founders with funding to scale the RevUp Regional Entrepreneurship Network. And finally, at COP30, the region launched a landmark multi-guarantor debt for resilience initiative aimed at boosting climate preparedness without adding new debt. Now, this has been your 90-second market brief. I'm Joseph Cox. For more, look for us on YouTube and Spotify.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox & Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox & Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Still ahead on Caribbean Business Review, our conversation with Latoya Halstead, Director of Communications, Consumer Affairs Commission, as we discuss price gouging in Jamaica, remedy or fallacy.
In terms of a metric as to how we would arrive at whether or not a vendor is actually committing the offense of price gouging, it would then be a matter of asking them to show us their books. The order empowers us so to do, and the Consumer Protection Act also empowers us to investigate. In these instances, if the vendor is not able to justify, to show how it is that you have come to this price, then automatically it can be attributed to price gouging.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. This is the Caribbean Business Review. My name is Joseph Cox, and today our very special guest is Latoya Halstead, who is the Director of Communications at the Consumer Affairs Commission in Jamaica. And we're going to be speaking about price gouging. Now, imagine this. Now, price gouging is basically an extraordinary increase in pricing that is usually following some period of either disaster, some upset within an economic framework. So, in welcoming you, Latoya, as you are the Consumer Affairs Commissioner, you all have been there threatening people about price gouging and have some attendant fines that are likely to be visited on offenders. My question to you is simply this. How does the Consumer Affairs Commission distinguish between legitimate market adjustments and predatory pricing in this particular dynamic?
Well, let me first off say that we haven't been threatening, we have been educating.
After all.
Because first you have to know what it is that you're doing and whether or not it contravenes a law. Now, in terms of a definition and how you know, price gouging usually occurs during times of natural disaster. First off, we have Hurricane Melissa. And for example, you used to purchase an item, say for $2,000, and out of nowhere, you are now paying $4,000 for that item. What is the justification? In the first instance, I automatically think to myself, the hurricane has just passed. The distributor would not have been able to import new items in such a short space of time because guess what? The airports are closed. Business for all intents and purpose would basically be trying to assess and see what is happening at this point in time. So why would your product be almost double or even triple the price? Now, as it relates to excessive pricing, as you rightly point out, this usually occurs as a result of market occurrences. So, for example, transportation. You have increased costs associated with that, and you can pass those on to consumers once you can fairly and justify that, yes, this is a cost, an additional cost that has been incurred.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you on that, but it's still you see what it is that I'm looking at is that it sounds absolutely notional and in some cases discretionary, because I'm not hearing you say like there's a defined metric that you would use to say, okay, this is a threshold beyond which within a particular timeline this would be flagged as potential predatory pricing.
Well, what I can say to you is that in the first instance, there are certain goods that are being monitored, and in this instance, excuse me, would come under price control. Remember that the antecedents of the Consumer Affairs Commission is that of the Prices Commission, where we had price control. As a result of the Disaster Risk Management Order, we have specific items that are now under price control. Now, the Consumer Affairs Commission, we monitor grocery, we monitor hardware, we monitor petrol. And these are three key areas where these items would come under. Now, in our monitoring of these items, we have established baselines for what the prices of these products would be prior to a natural disaster. So, in terms of a metric as to how we would arrive at whether or not a vendor is actually committing the offense of price gouging, it would then be a matter of asking them to show us their books. The order empowers us so to do, and the Consumer Protection Act also empowers us to investigate. In these instances, if the vendor is not able to justify, to show how it is that you have come to this price, then automatically it can be attributed to price gouging.
No, I'm hearing you on this, but you see, because I went through the documentation, at least as much as I could find on this area. And one of the things that struck me was what it didn't cover, to be truthful. So, yes, you are referencing, for example, the retailers, and you've been monitoring, and you, I presume, well, you also, in the legislation or the documentation, speak to the hardware survey that's done, and I think a grocery kind of
Items, and it's
survey
a
that is
critical
done.
basket, right?
Right, good. But what it doesn't cover, the wholesale people, distributors. And to be very frank with you, the most glaring omission, and that is omission by obvious design, is the exemption of the agricultural products, which, frankly speaking, those are the ones usually after disaster, etc. Those are the first areas that people go to. So, for example, fruits, vegetables, etc. Right?
Right.
Usually, and frankly speaking, it's even seasonally, because even when you're coming up to Christmas, all of a sudden, what a pound of tomatoes would sell for, if you're not careful, can double or triple. And it strikes me as being a little odd why that sort of exemption will be put in place, both for the wholesalers, distributors, as well as the vendors of agricultural produce, which, frankly speaking, will be ripe for that sort of substantive increasing pricing.
That's a very good observation. However, I can speak to only what the order has specified, and the fact that the Consumer Affairs Commission, we have been charged with this basket of critical grocery items. So literally, it doesn't apply to vegetables. It applies to basic food items. You're talking about the flour, the rice, the sugar, oil, stuff like that, which should not be affected by a natural disaster. Meaning, right now you see where the Minister of Agriculture is stating how much of the agricultural sector has been affected, literally
Yes.
wiped out. So
Well, in
while I
some
can,
areas, yes.
yes, in some areas, and I can appreciate that. However, what should be readily available and should not be hoarded, or should not cost an arm and a leg, and if not, perhaps even another arm, are those goods that should be readily available by the distributors. And I'd like to remind you that prior to the hurricane, the minister did meet with the distributive trade to ascertain exactly what level of food stocks we had. Therefore, we could then estimate the availability. As it relates to the agricultural sector, I don't think that could be readily done like that.
No, that's a fair point. But you see, I mean, all right. When you travel, for example, as I did, along the North Coast and stop at certain vantage points and so on, complaints were clear. You know? Things like water, suddenly 50% increase, in some cases, double. And there was a very interesting thing that I noticed was that, for example, in terms of petrol, right? We can get gasoline, you know, that type of. Persons were actually buying this stuff clearly more than they needed in bottles, in all sorts of containers. And when you ask, they were actually reselling at a premium.
And that's
Again,
why
the law don't cover that.
and that is
And
why I
that's
was
a
about
reality.
to ask. That is why I was
Okay.
about to ask you. No, from whom were these products being sold from? Because
Right.
I know that, for example, at the petrol station, when you go to buy the gas, the fact is you are getting it at what the cost should be. For example, say 90, you're getting it at 185. You're still getting that in Kingston, say, for example, at 185 or around about there. Now, when you have a consumer who decides that I'm going to go to the petrol station, I'm going to stand in line, wait for however long, and I'm going to on-sell to somebody else. The fact is, consumers have the right to walk away. They also have the right to go to that petrol station themselves and stand up in that line and buy it at the cost that they desire.
Yeah, but Latoya, that sounds nice. And I mean, I can't fault you on that. But here's the challenge with that. We know that, for example, in a lot of the communities, most people, forget petrol now. Most people go to the corner shop, right? They don't go to the large supermarkets or whatever it is. Even if they are open, they don't really go there. They go to the corner shop, where all of a sudden, what what you run into is that's where you find the unselling now and the substantive markup. So what I'm looking at is, I mean, clearly it is what it is now. But I'm looking
Right.
at the next iteration as well, because it seems to me that some of these gaps are what you guys at the Consumer Affairs Commission should be looking at. One. Two, this is also a lesson for our regional partners, because they will have the same challenges that you are facing. Don't kid yourself. 'Cause even though the countries are different, you know, trust me, the experiences are not dissimilar at all. And three, you see, when we start to look at this dynamic, what is particularly worrisome is in terms of one, really cutting back on some of these practices, because already we see it in terms of the agricultural food stuff. And honestly, some of it is ridiculous what you hear being charged. And my attitude is just walk away from it. Eh?
There you go.
But no, serious, because when it comes to
Yes.
that point, you realize it's nonsense. And it's funny because when you think like things like what people call now green onion or scallion or whatever we reference it as. Honestly, when we live overseas, we can't get that too readily, right? Of the quality that we get here. So, you know, we do, we buy in bulk and freeze it. Right?
Yes,
So,
I agree with
we
you.
may really have to go to that sort of strategy. But the other thing that I wanted to raise with you on this particular area is that even where you guys are looking at, and I'm going to ask you about, of course, if you have an army of agents who going to these communities to monitor. But aside from that, when you're looking at the receipting process, like I presume, and looking at the thing is that people would have to present receipts to verify, you know.
This is as it relates to proving the matter of
Proving, yeah.
price gouging. Right. Yes,
Right.
they would have to
Good.
present a receipt. Uh-huh.
There's one small problem, and sad to say, this is not limited to you guys at the Consumer Affairs Commission in this regard. It references our tax department, it refers a whole lot of problems that it comes with. And the simple is, most of the receipts that are issued now are they use thermal paper.
And that's where
No.
we ask you to take a picture.
Yeah, but you see, I'm not sure that the picture in terms of the court, because you have all sorts of chain of thing, and this is this day and age of AI, you're going to hear about manipulation of that, etc., etc. Because the honest truth is that with our climate, the thermal receipts, as a lot of people learn the hard way in terms of the tax system, it fades in
Yes,
sometimes
it
when you have
does
extreme
fade.
temperatures. It fades in sometimes a week, 2 weeks, a month if you're lucky. Whereas in the cooler climates, it can last for 6 months.
Right. And there's also the fact that, you can also copy it. But if it is that you
Yeah, but you don't have no
intend,
power in a hurricane. So you can't
well,
copy.
I could say the similar thing about using your phone to take a picture. But
Then that too.
where where I was going with it though is that if it is that we intend to use that as as a piece of evidence in a court setting, it can be notarized to say that this is a true reflection of so and so and so. The bottom line is, though, Joseph, is that there are many things out there that should happen. And unfortunately, in terms of how it is transpiring, it is affecting consumers to a certain extent, which is negative. Now, what I would advise consumers to do is, as much as is possible, in a situation, for example, what you have pointed out about agricultural stuff and the high cost, you walk away. Alternatively, you can freeze. But here's the other thing. In a situation like this, I will use an example. I normally freeze scallion. It's easy. However, when electricity goes, if you have not used that up, what's going to happen?
Sure. Point
Right.
taken.
So, it's in a sense a give and take. And I also need to say that the man the man on the corner who is selling and the price of stuff will go up. I also have to look at the issue that how this person is, for example, keeping some of their produce or goods, how they're able to keep it so that it is sellable. Is they perhaps have a generator and they would have had to incur additional costs as it relates to perhaps petrol once again. I am not advocating at all that persons increase their prices arbitrarily. But if it is that you can prove that you have additional expenses relating to increase to the keeping the goods, I would say, show us. The law
All right.
often speaks about being reasonable. In this space and this time, I expect our vendors, I expect the distributive trade to be reasonable, and I also expect that consumers to also be reasonable in their expectations.
My friend,
And
this.
the reason for that, Joseph, is that really and truly it is a trying time. And
No, agreed.
it is a trying
Uh,
time. And many of us, we're not thinking about being reasonable. We're thinking about, where's the next meal coming from? Do I have a
No,
roof
agreed.
over my head?
Agreed.
And I
Agreed.
can encourage you to be like that, because at the end of the day, that is one thing that you don't have to buy. You have to work on yourself for that.
Well, I hear it. Sounds good. Sounds good. But it's sad. I have to say this 2 weeks in a row on this program. But I think the milk of human kindness is grossly overstated. Trust me.
I'm telling
That's
you.
a reality, my dear, and that's a reality. But all right, let me move on a little bit, because yes, there is a fine, a maximum of $1 million that can be brought to bear for breaches under this. But there's the two things that I wasn't clear on. One, is it per breach, meaning per item? So if I overcharge you for, I don't know, a sheet of plywood, would I be liable for that, for being charged, or is it that the offense is overcharging for all the ply that is in it, and it is not specific to each individual transaction, but for a general offense? Which is it? You can help me with that?
In that instance, given that we're asking consumers to show receipts
Mm-hmm.
to establish whether or not price gouging has taken place, based on the investigation that is done, it would be related to the receipt, because the fact is, the vendor, after that interaction, can change the price, but you can't change the price on the receipt that has already established that this is what you charged me.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying it's per offense, per item, as it were. Okay.
Per transaction, because
Per
you can have more
transaction.
than one transaction on a
Okay.
receipt, meaning more than one items.
Okay. But in that regard, I presume then you have a whole army of people who go out and investigate, or is the onus on the consumer to convey the complaint to you?
It is both.
How does it work?
It is both. We do monitor the prices, as well as we encourage consumers to also report cases of price gouging or suspected price gouging. And here is what I have a difficulty with, Joseph.
Yes.
In Hurricane Beryl, we didn't have a lot of cases being reported about price gouging. And one of the issue is that persons were not willing to go the long run. They were not willing to go to court so that, yes. So the fact is, you are making a report. You have taken it that far. Why not just go through with the rest of it? We have to rely on you just like how you rely on us.
So, all right, coming out of the Beryl, since you have mentioned it, Beryl was in 2024. Yes?
Yes.
Right. Coming out of that experience, how many cases of price gouging were actually prosecuted?
And that is the problem. We had reports, but in terms of prosecution, we had one that was ready to go to court, but the consumer decided not to.
Oh, mercy. Wow.
And that is why I'm saying what I'm saying. In order for us to help you, you have to help us.
But then I would say to you this, Latoya, that it seems to me that then the whole legislative underpinning probably needs to be reoriented. Where because we do know that on the average, right,
Mhm.
people are reluctant to go to court, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we know this. This is not new. And therefore, I'm wondering whether or not the laws from where you sit at the Consumer Affairs Commission and others who would be watching or hearing this program mightn't be guided to start to enforce some sort of transparency guarantees, meaning one, so prior to any kind of disaster, and frankly speaking, as a general practice, persons should be made to display prices so you can know pre and post what is the change. Two, it seems to me that the big gap, as I alluded to before, you have to bring the wholesalers and distributors into the mix because it's a relatively short period of time. It's not that you're going to have this process in place for 6 months. It's a relatively short period of time that you actually do enforce these things. And it seems to me that you need to put that sort of structure in place for them. And thirdly, as uncomfortable as it may be for some, you have to look at the agricultural produce. Because, in other words, it seems to me that we're having there are too many gaps in the process, right? And you need to have you have to have one, effective enforcement, and two, and turn the onus not on the thing, not on the consumer, so to speak. Yes, they provide you with a receipt, yes? But the fact of life is that your own investigation supposed to be using, I would think, the receipt as barely as part of the evidentiary pool, but
And
not
that,
absolute and requires them to necessarily be up front and center in the process.
but remember what I also said is
Yes.
that we do have the powers to investigate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you mentioned the gray area where you
Right.
have persons who would be selling at a higher cost, and this is not
Mm-hmm.
captured. The fact is, we, or survey officers, we go into um, we go into establishments that are legal establishments. When we are monitoring the prices, we don't just look at what's on the shelf. The manager has to sign off on that process to say, this
Mm-hmm.
is what we have seen. And then this goes into our database. Now, as it relates to consumers and them providing receipts, we normally encourage consumers not only to keep the receipts prior to the hurricane season, but also
Mm-hmm.
what they have purchased. Because it's while we can go out and we investigate and we establish certain things, there are things that we won't be able to necessarily capture if you, for example, let me give you an example. Somebody has lost their roof, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, 16 months ago, say you had replaced your roof during burial
Mm-hmm.
and you paid 500,000
Mm-hmm.
to replace it. Hurricane Melissa has come. You go back to that same person, 16 months. They're
Mm-hmm.
telling you 700,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's the quote that you're being given. Now, my concern with that is, yes, we are in a market where normally you bargain. But in a situation like this, where I just buy a roof from you for 500,000, all of a sudden it's now 700,000. How do you treat with a situation like that? The expectation is that the consumer should bargain. But really and truly, I don't think many consumers would be in that frame of mind to be bargaining. They want a roof over their head. So I'm just saying that as it relates to consumers obtaining receipts, it's very important. And it's also important not to just obtain it, but to keep records.
I appreciate that, and I would totally endorse that. If not, I mean, aside from your process here for tax purposes and so on, because it does matter. But then let me ask you this: in the event that, say it happens to me, and I go out and I follow it through, I dog it in the process, and I follow it through to the end, and there is the actual imposition of the maximum fine. Let me just carry it to the extreme: the maximum fine of $1 million. Who gets that money?
I would consolidated fund.
Yes. No, but
CF. Yes.
no.
To the
If the
government
funds go
coffers
to
and
this
then
this
yeah.
consolidated fund, then what's the benefit to me? Frankly
Motivation.
speaking, motivate.
Yeah.
No, but I'm sorry. This is another area that I would urge you guys to look at in a very serious way, to see whether or not we can deal with things of this nature, where even if a portion of it, there must be some
Goes back
element
to
of
the consumer.
restitution to the person. Or there is no, what would be the incentive of doing it? I mean, fine, you're doing a civic duty, etc. But frankly speaking, because where I'm coming from, you reference thing about roofing material, and
Right.
I made a big to do about it on this program recently, whereby part of the challenge that people face, for example, in Western Jamaica, in the immediate aftermath of Melissa, is that one, you talk about roofing material, about 500,000. Some roofing tiles, people running them from 900,000, $1 million. And here's the trick: the banks were pretty much closed, all the ATMs were down, etc., etc. And the hardware is looking at them and saying, give cash only. No, fine, normal disaster preparedness thing tell you, oh, you keep some cash at home, etc.,
But you're
etc.
not
But
keeping $1
no,
million.
ain't nobody go keep no $1 million cash. That's silly, right?
Not to
So
mention that
what we
would have
find now.
no, but Joe, remember what would have also happened is withdrawing that $1 million would also raise red flags from the BOG
Well, that
perspective
too.
as well.
That too. That too. So no, but so you see, this is the kind of mechanism that I'm looking at, because it strikes me that as we look, I mean, as well intentioned as what the processes you have in place are, the fact of life is that there are too many, in my view. There is now an opportunity for it to be really, really strengthened, for it to be truly effective, and that way will get people to follow through on the the complaints, tighten processes, etc., etc.
I agree with
Because
you.
in the
There are
absence of that,
gaps. And there is room for amendments to be made. The fact is, we've never had a category 5. Some people say 8. Hurricane before, but and I've never seen our people in such dire straits, and it does
But
it
Latoya,
this
I hear the narrative, and I hear the narrative. But frankly speaking, yes, and my heart goes out to those affected in Western Jamaica. Don't get me wrong.
but it gives us a chance to fix the structures that we already have.
No, I agree. And strengthen them. But you see, when we start to look at things, so when Melissa affected the Western the island.
Yes.
When we had Gilbert in 1988, frankly
my
speaking, it
gosh.
went right through the island. I mean, I still don't hear people complaining about, oh, they don't have electricity for a week, 2 weeks, and it's like they're tearing up. They
6
hear
months.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. That was what people were faced with, and you just had to do what you had to do. But the point I'm making is that we need to, when we're looking at the structures, we can't have in place a mechanism where, for example, and this is squarely with you guys at Consumer Affairs, I would think, whereby, for example, everybody is talking about and has been putting in place mechanisms whereby persons' salaries are being deposited by the use of direct deposit, in some case wire transfer, dependent on location. But in the absence of power, in the absence of internet, etc., That
What
is
do we
absolutely
do?
meaningless. They can't access anything. So it seems to me from the other side of it that all of you, as part of the consumer protection mechanism, need to be lobbying for and putting in place structures whereby we have protocols where when systems go offline, there are mechanisms where there's like a hybrid approach. So people sometimes, there are mechanisms for people to access offline payments, etc., etc. So the whole system does not become absolutely dependent on one set of processes. And so to me, that's where I am seeing this. And I mean, yes, we're speaking about price gouging, which I suppose is a negative in its own, on its own. But the truth of it is that where my head is going is that this constitutes an opportunity for us to really, really re-engineer some of our processes, learn from some of the mistakes, some of the gaps, close some of the gaps that are there to really strengthen this. Because truthfully, what was our 1 in 100 year event? Frankly, these things look like annual 2 years or 3 years,
And, that is why part of what has been done by the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce is basically we have agencies and departments, members from agencies and departments going on the ground, speaking with the persons, establishing what is required, how it is that we can assist in getting them up and going. You know, when you think of the fact that all that is required is for a business to restart is just utilities because they have not been affected. And then you wonder, how is it that this is an easy fix? How is it that we can't deliver this? But here's the other unfortunate reality. We don't work in a vacuum. We work with systems.
Quite so. Right. No, that's just a reality. But and the last thing I would say for suggest to do it, to say all that and to encapsulate what you just said is that it seems to me we need some sort of consumer protection task force, one that covers multi stakeholders, that actually can effect that type of transformation.
Well, we have the National Consumer Policy that is supposed to, it hasn't yet been passed. That is what is to effect that kind of, it's to assist us to identify the consumer areas regardless of the sector and have a joined up approach to consumerism. However, at the end of the
Sounds
day,
good.
yes, it is policy. And with everything, it takes time. But what I would encourage us to do is to have that mindset. Because if you don't, you are going to perhaps look at it and say, that is just probably another airy-fairy kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it has to start somewhere, and it has to start with us. We ourselves here at the Consumer Affairs Commission, we don't make consumers. Each person in their own right is a consumer. And once we recognize that and recognize that the responsibility for how the country runs, it's on us and our expectations and our demands. And that is why we keep saying to our consumers, you have to be the change that you expect that you see.
All right. And that's where we have to leave it for today. So thank you very much, Latoya Halstead, Director of Communications at the Consumer Affairs Commission here in Jamaica. So thanks so much, my friend.
Thank you.
All the best.
Okay, you too.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox and Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox and Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
This is a Market Watch. I'm Joseph Cox. We begin in Jamaica, where Moody's RMS now estimate losses from Hurricane Melissa at over $20 billion US. Insured losses could reach $5 billion US, with hotels and commercial properties hardest hit. But with only 20% of households insured, the reconstruction gap remains wide. Moody's still expects a short-term GDP dip, even as it maintains Jamaica's B1 positive outlook. Still in Jamaica, the agriculture sector suffered $29.5 billion Jamaican dollars in damage across 41,000 hectares and more than 70,000 farmers. Government has deployed $450 million Jamaican dollars in emergency support, with rapid replanting in agro-parks and repairs for the 25% of fishing vessels destroyed. Meanwhile, Jamaica's net international reserves slipped $67.6 million US dollars to $6.13 billion US, reflecting stepped-up foreign exchange interventions, though buffers remain well above IMF adequacy thresholds. Barbados has secured an S&P upgrade to B+, supported by fiscal consolidation and declining debt. Reserves stand at $1.9 billion US dollars, inflation is 2.3%, and unemployment has eased to 7%. In the Turks and Caicos Islands, GDP expanded 6.5% in 2024, revenues rose 9%, and reserves climbed to $430 million US. S&P's A- rating reflects robust liquidity and strong tourism momentum. Turning to Guyana, the government has upgraded its 2025 forecast to 15.2%, driven by strong oil and non-oil sectors. Inflation eased to 2.9%, supported by fuel price cuts of up to 34%. Guyana also crossed a major milestone, 900,000 barrels per day in production across the Stabroek Block, marking one of the fastest offshore oil ramp-ups in the world. At COP30, the IDB, CAF, and CDB launched a Caribbean multi-guarantor debt for resilience initiative, aiming to scale debt for resilience swaps, unlock fiscal space, and strengthen climate readiness without adding new debt. In the Bahamas, National Determined Contributions 3.0 targets 80% clean vehicle sales by 2035, supported by duty cuts, expanded charging networks, and electrification of the public fleet. Turning to our markets. On the Forex market, Caribbean currencies held steady. The Jamaican dollar traded at 161.62 to the US dollar, the TNT dollar at $6.74, Suriname at 38.84, and the Haitian gourd at 131.45. All other currencies remain unchanged. Across regional stock markets, the JSE index advanced 0.66% to 311,397. Trinidad All TNT Index gained 0.47%. The BIX All Share in the Bahamas was unchanged at 3,067 points, and the Barbados BSE Local rose 0.02% to 2,789. Bermuda and the Eastern Caribbean remained flat. Top gainers were 138 Student Living, up 10.73%, and Panjam Group, up 10.25%. Top losers were Jamaica Broilers Group, down 20.06%, and 138 Student Living Variable Preference Shares, down 11.59%. Now that's your Market Watch for this week. I'm Joseph Cox. Global Pulse is up next. This is CBR. This is your Global Pulse. I'm Joseph Cox. In the United States, ADP's high-frequency data shows firms cutting more than 11,000 jobs a week in late October, even though the monthly report still shows a net gain of 42,000. Across the Atlantic, in the UK, GDP grew just 0.1% in Q3, dragged down by the Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack, which pushed motor vehicle output to its lowest levels in 73 years. Unemployment has climbed to 5%, exports to the US have dropped 11.4%, and the September trade deficit widened to £20.7 billion. Meanwhile, the European Union is moving quickly to rein in ultra-cheap Chinese e-commerce. Brussels will abolish the €150 duty-free threshold by early 2026, 2 years ahead of schedule as parcels from Shein, Temu, and AliExpress top 4.6 billion a year. A unified €2 handling fee is under consideration to avoid fragmenting the single market. Japan is grappling with renewed inflation pressures. Wholesale prices rose 2.7% in October, above expectations, and a weakening yen threatens to push import costs higher. The Bank of Japan remains cautious about further rate hikes until it sees inflation driven by domestic demand, not external shocks. Tech regulation is back in focus as the EU opens an antitrust probe into Google over its anti-spam policy, which publishers say has slashed revenue by reducing their search visibility. Under the Digital Markets Act, Google faces fines of up to 10% of global turnover if found in breach. In the U.S., the hemp industry faces an existential crisis after Congress passed a ban on products containing more than 0.4 milligrams of THC per container, eliminating 95% of gummies, vapes, and beverages on the market. The sector warns 300,000 jobs are at risk. Foreclosures in the U.S. rose for the 8th straight month, up 19% year-on-year. Germany has announced a major shift in telecom security, pledging to remove Huawei from 5G wherever possible and banning Chinese components entirely from its 6G rollout. Berlin says the goal is digital sovereignty, not full decoupling. Australia beat expectations with 42,200 new jobs in October, pushing unemployment down to 4.3%. Oil markets softened as OPEC now forecasts a small surplus in 2026, reversing earlier deficit projections. EV momentum remains strong globally. Sales rose 23% in October to 1.9 million units, led by China and Europe, while North America slumped 41% following the expiry of U.S. tax credits. Mexico has imposed a 156% tariff on sugar imports, effectively closing the market to foreign supply to stabilize domestic prices. And China's economy continues to weaken, with industrial output up just 4.9%, retail sales rising 2.9%, and investment falling, prompting calls for new policy direction in 2026. Now turning to the markets, oil prices moved higher, with WTI crude up 2.39% to $60.09, and Brent up 1.97% to $64.25, while the OPEC basket slipped 2.61%. Natural gas eased 1.72% to $4.57. On the international stock market, U.S. indices were mixed. The Dow fell 0.65%, the S&P dipped marginally, while the Nasdaq added 0.13%. European markets declined across the board, led by the FTSE down 1.1%. In Asia, selling pressures hit hard, with Japan's Nikkei down 1.77% and Hong Kong's Hang Seng of 1.85%. This has been your Global Pulse. I'm Joseph Cox, and this is CBR. Well, that's a wrap on episode 10 of season 2 of the Caribbean Business Review. Now, thank you so much to our loyal audience on MKR Radio and all digital platforms for your continued support. As always, we live by our mantra, knowledge is strength, but information is power. A special thanks to our guest, Latoya Halstead, Director of Communications at the Consumer Affairs Commission, for her unvarnished insights into the vexed issue of price gouging in Jamaica, particularly in the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa. Some of the key takeaways: Weaknesses in the current tools and data thresholds used to determine whether a price increase is reasonable or predatory. The implications of the agricultural and reseller exemptions that leave consumers unprotected. The urgent need for both legislative reform and operational overhaul in policing price gouging, the muted level of reporting thus far, and the urgent need to maintain confidence in system integrity. Now, please remember you can listen to this broadcast at your convenience on Spotify. The latest edition of the Caribbean Financial Dispatch is live on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and linked in the YouTube comments. To subscribe, email us at caribbeanbusinessreview@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and follow Caribbean Business Review on TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. Until next week, same time, same place, I'm Joseph Cox, and this has been CBR.